Virtual autism. Let's reframe that from a lens of blame to balance. But let's start with an important reminder. If we truly want to support children, we have to stop blaming the parents, especially when we are talking about topics like screen time, development, and so called virtual autism. There's been a lot of talk recently about how screens are impacting child development, especially in the early years, which is great. But when it's clubbed with terms like virtual autism and it's been thrown around more and more, it creates more confusion than clarity. So it's often said that young children who are exposed to too much screen time, especially in the age of 0 to 3 years, show delay in speech, social connection, and can even mimic traits that we associate to autism. Now, this has led to a lot of anxiety among parents, especially those who are already stretched thin. So, we need to ask what are we really seeing here and who does this kind of message really help? So, is virtual autism really a diagnosis? Let's get clear on this upfront. Virtual autism is not a clinical diagnosis. It is not recognized by DSM or ICD or any other global health authorities. It is a descriptive label, mostly found sometimes in research articles, but in as anecdotal references or observational reports based on observations that some children who are heavily exposed to screens early in life show delay or social withdrawal and may later improve when screens are removed. So I'm not debating that. The trouble is we need to pause here. Just because a child improves when screen time is reduced, that does not mean screen caused autism or the child was ever autistic to begin with. We do not know. So that is a very loud claim that we are making when we club these two terminologies together. And more dangerously, if we keep pushing the idea that screens are the cause of all developmental differences, we run the risk of delaying genuine support for children who actually need it. So, because autism existed before screens, autism is a neurodevelopmental variation and it always existed long before smartphones, tablets, or any kind of digital media. So, if removing screen does not remove autism, and are we here about removing autism? Is the next question we need to ask. That kind of thinking reduces the very complex human experience to a tech based problem, and that's simply not true and it's not helpful when we use this virtual autism alongside digital detox, and we use it so callously and flippantly, and that's not okay. So what screens can do and what they can't. Now, does this mean screens don't affect development? Of course not. No, that's not what I'm saying. I have been a strong proponent of reducing screens and how to use screens. In fact, my first research article itself was about screens, but screens, especially the high intensity ones, which offer visual and auditory input, and children, a child, especially 0 to 3 years, they rely on the tactile, movement based, and body centered experience. That's how the central nervous system develops. So it is bottom up. Before they can think and feel, they need to sense the world around it. How do they sense the world? By swinging, crawling, climbing, touching textures, by being held, by being rocked, by being mirrored emotionally. So it's all about balance, coordination, body awareness. They really explore the world around them. And these are through sensory experiences. And these are all bottom up developmental needs, which every child needs. Now, this is not specific to autism. This is for every child. They begin in their body and build upwards into their feeling and thinking brains, and that's how the foundation for regulation, attention, and learning. So, too much screen exposure can interrupt this process. That is true, especially in children under 3 who are very in that sensitive window of brain growth. So, yes, regulating screen use, especially in children in the first 3 years, is important. But This is not about blame. There has to be a, this is about the context. We cannot ignore why screens are being used. So when we say don't do something, let us first try to understand why is it being done. Okay, so many parents today are raising children in environments without help, without rest, without accessible support systems. So when a parent uses a screen, it's often not because they don't care. It's because they are overwhelmed or isolated or trying to cope without a village. So let's not here give them a verdict when what they wanted is a village. So when we have talks or write-ups which mention the correlation of screens and speech delays, which is fine. But when that becomes a causation for autism, it is problematic. So we are very serious about supporting child development. Then we can't just keep saying, don't give screens, don't give screens. No, that's not like, it's not binary, yes and no. We need to ask who is supporting this parent? What alternatives do they realistically have right now, or how can we create environments that nourish both the child and the caregiver, because parent is told your child's delay are due to screens, so they might stop seeking the real support that the child needs, and they might waste precious time by cutting off screens, and they will just keep waiting again thinking that okay, screens are removed, now problem is sorted, and they feel helpless if the child doesn't again begin to speak or still does not regulate and still shows difficulty in reciprocity. So that in the long run is a very harmful advice if it is not given in the context of how the parent is living. So it gives false sense of control while dismissing both the needs of the child and also the challenges that the parents are facing. How come they started giving the screens in the first place? What benefits did they really notice? And how come other alternatives were not possible? We need to ask those questions before we hurry and say remove the screen. So screens can also be a form of regulation for many children. So, let's talk about something that we are not really seeing enough. Some children, especially those who are neurodivergent, again, that is another label. So they use screens to self-regulate. So let's say a child has come home from school. They are overwhelmed by all the sensory inputs, trying to mask, follow, and fit in, and they are in their crowded classrooms, and they somehow might come across as well behaved and absolutely non-problematic at schools, and they come home and they are reaching home with such a sensory overload, and they're coming home to the safe space home and the safe people, the parents, and they can't explain why they are feeling this. They don't want to be touched or even spoken to in this moment. A familiar video or a song on a screen sometimes offer a simple predictability, a control, and a calm. So sometimes, yes, they do come to this to it is a kind of a grounding because of what has happened previously. So without context, if you say no, we cannot use screen, that becomes a problem. So here it doesn't mean the screen is the problem, it might be their only available coping mechanism. So before we judge that moment, we need to understand, we need to ask, how can we offer other forms of regulation alongside it, not instead of it. So we need to engage with the parent and the child and find out how can we support, because every child is different, every family is different, and we must remember screens affect all of us. It's not just autistic children, not just neurodivergent individuals. Every one of us are vulnerable to digital fatigue, attention fragmentation happens, sensory overwhelm happens with prolonged screen use. Even if I'm using the earplugs, at the end of the day, even my ears start aching, my eye starts aching. That doesn't mean, the trouble is when we correlate it to autism. Let's use correlate it to sense organs and how our brain is processing information, sensory information. So the idea of digital hygiene is great. For periodical digital detox is fantastic. It is something which everyone benefits, and yes, even more so for little children as they grow younger, yes, because their brains are just about developing. But it is not just for children who are developmentally different or delayed or any other. This is for everybody. So that does not mean we are banning screens. Let us use them intentionally with support, not with fear. So it's with balance and not with shame. So finally, like I said before, let us not be here giving verdicts without having the context. That is the legal system. But in mental health, rehabilitation, disability or education, it's very, very nuanced. We can't just go by these binaries. So parents really do not need verdicts. If we want children to thrive, we have to build ecosystems of support around families and not to just throw labels and then say, okay, fine, now you figure it out. You take away the screens, now you figure it out. So let's stop offering shame in place of support. Let's stop telling parents what not to do and instead ask them, how can we help you? There are many parents who said that I was forced to turn on the TV because I didn't have any support in the kitchen, or I did not have any support to do the other work that I had to do. So if you say remove the screens to this parent, how else? We need to have those conversations. So let us not waste our precious time by hunting for a single cause effect for autism and everything boiling down to screen. And when that development that's happening in our brain is as a result of so many complex, beautiful and interconnected factors. So let's not move from a fear-based headlines or a clickbait to a compassion-driven guidance, because in the end it's not about removing screens, it's about how do we restore connection. And their screens can restore connection, screens can restore communication too. There are many screens which can augment and be an alternative to several non-speaking individuals. So many other things that screen offers. So let's not make it a blanket yes or no and go through the correction model, but let's go through it with the connection model. Thank you.